A big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. If you need a website or a domain, go to squarespace.com/James for 10% off your first purchase. Hello everybody, hope you're all well and welcome back to the channel. I was about to say that I'm fresh back from Antarctica and Patagonia, but that would be a lie, because as you can probably tell, I'm not fresh at all. Yesterday, on the way home from the airport, on the train, I managed to throw away my wallet. Just completely delirious. Gone. So I've had to reorder all my cards and driving licence, and a lot of fun. Anyway, I've had a full night's sleep since then, so today what I thought I'd do is show you some footage and some photos from that Antarctica trip, but I didn't make a full video, I was more focused on the workshop. So around that, I want to talk about something first, and then after I show you some footage and photos, I'll show you how I edited one of my photos in the hope that that's interesting or useful, or both. So, first thing I want to talk about was that this trip, this Antarctica trip, was like, I was going to say an epiphany, that's too strong. Realisation even is a bit strong. Like a sharpening of a realisation that I think I've been having for the past year or two about my photography specifically. And it's this. I used to, back in the day, if I got a free day to go out and take photos, and even if it's for work, I'd call it a free day because it feels like a free day compared to emails. But I used to spend a lot of the day before planning. So I'd look at like 4 weather apps, I'd look at Google Maps, OS Maps, Komoot, All Trails, whatever it might be. And then I'd open photo pills and try and work out where the sunrise was going to be for various locations. I'd do lots of planning, and that felt like an integral part of my process to go out and take photos. And it felt like a fun part of the process as well. However, over time, that has changed somewhat to the point where now I absolutely adore trips like this Antarctica trip because you're honed to expect the unexpected. And even though on this trip we had the entire ship to ourselves for our workshop, which meant that we could talk to the captain, talk to the expedition leader about plans for the next day, where we should go, what the weather looked like, and how we could optimise all that for photography, you're in Antarctica. The weather changes, plans have to change, you have to be flexible. And that, I think, is just the most liberating way to shoot. And this trip really put the full stop on the realisation for me that this is how I want to shoot. Zero planning. And over the past couple of years, I've realised as I walk around the streets of Lisbon or somewhere in Italy or New York, that not knowing what is around the corner is just the nicest feeling. Because if I get a photo that I really like, it feels 100 times sweeter than one that I've planned for. And again, that might not be you, it could just be me. But also I get none of the anxiety that I used to get around whether a shot was going to work as I'd planned it to work. You know, are there going to be cars in the way? Is the sun actually going to rise, or is it going to be behind a cloud? And not planning solves all of that. And I guess you could argue that I miss out on shots because I don't plan these days. But the loss I get from not planning is more than made up for from the joy I get of the unexpected. This is Wordy House, I think, who is Shackleton's chief scientist. I think I'm butchering that, but it's amazing inside. Can't fathom being stationed here though.
So 4 to 6 people for 2 years they spent here.
2 years?
Yeah, they would change over a half each year. So that there was always people who had 12 months experience at running the dogs and doing the scientific work, and so the new people would come in and learn the ropes, and so they always had a sort of cycling of groups. And so if someone was getting on your nerves, you only had to put up with them for 12 months.
Just the 12.
But, the thing is that with dog teams, you could always go out and pat a dog and find someone you could talk to who wouldn't argue back.
Also, just quickly, we are contemplating doing another trip to Antarctica in 2026. So if you think that might be of interest, you can register your details below in the description. Not actually in the description, there's a link in the description, I should say. So yeah, that was some photos and footage. Hopefully you enjoyed that. This, I think, though, is probably my favourite shot from the trip. One of them, at least. And I've probably got 100 different versions of this photo, and I've picked this one to edit because the flag is in the best position. Basically, it's out of the way of this line of snow here, which I quite like, and it's relatively flat, so you can see what flag it is. The Argentine flag. Now, I have actually been to this place before on our previous trip to Antarctica, and in fact I got one of my favourite photos ever on our last landing at this station. But this time we couldn't land. We were just in the Zodiacs. There was work going on at the station, and it gave us a different perspective, I suppose. And I like this photo for pretty much all the same reasons I liked the previous photo I took at this station, is that I just have so many questions about what is going on in the scene. And it's the perfect mix, for me at least, of this human nature dynamic that I love to explore. So yeah, big fan of this shot and this place, and I thought it would be interesting to show you how I edit this photo. Now, if I click reset, I mean, this is the edited photo pretty much. If I click reset to take everything back to how I actually shot it, you can see that it's an awful lot darker and a bit wider than the finished photo. I like to edit, as I've spoken about lots of times on this channel, in quite a high-key fashion. I like my images really nice and bright, but I don't necessarily like to shoot in that way in case when I come to edit, I actually don't want that particular photo nice and bright, and I don't want to blow all of my highlights. So I prefer to retain that detail and then just lift the image in post if that's what I decide to do. Lots of people like to get it right in camera, but I prefer to do it this way. It's all personal preference, pros and cons for each. First thing I'm going to do is crop, I think, because I don't really like this iceberg here. And I guess you could clone that out, or you could do some sort of AI stuff to that in Photoshop if you were so inclined. I'm just going to crop. I don't see the harm in cropping this. So I'll crop to something like that, I think. Perfect. I should also say, before we continue, one of my favourite things about this photo is the shadow of this ladder on this hut here. The sun came out and just gave a really nice shadow. Big fan of that. Anyway, next thing I'm going to do is just apply a preset. I'm going to go for light and dreamy in my preset pack, and we can go through what that has done. So, in short, I've raised the shadows and raised the whites. As I said, I like to have my images nice and bright. Now, to be honest, these days I'm experimenting much more with raising the blacks rather than the shadows. I quite like what that does in terms of softening the image. It still keeps the contrast, but it just makes the blacks a bit softer, and I'm a really big fan of that. So I'm experimenting with that much more these days, so I'll do that instead. Maybe I'll make that change permanently to the preset at some point. What else is going on here? I have nudged up the vibrance a touch. To be honest, I could probably do without that. And I've taken down the saturation quite a lot, -27. And the reason for that is that I like to then be selecting and playing around with colours independently. So I take down the saturation for everything, and then I play around with colours individually in the HSL panel. Now, in terms of tone curve, as you'll know if you've got these presets, I like to play around with simple S-curves, basically. But my blacks, again, I'm bringing my blacks up quite a lot. And to be honest, the pointer that's doing all of the work, pretty much, in this S-curve is this pointer here. Because if I bring this up, we lose all of the contrast, pretty much. So this is just an anchor to make sure that I'm keeping contrast, while also having kind of softer blacks. I find it difficult to explain some of these concepts in English, or any other language. But yeah, hopefully you can sort of see what I mean. Colours, saturation, as you can see, I go pretty hard on the orange and yellows with this preset, and I play around with the green as well, particularly in the luminance, but there's no green in this image, so that is irrelevant. I think I've gone too far with this preset though, as far as orange goes, so I'm just going to dial that back a touch because these huts are very saturated, and then if I go into luminance, I can just bring the luminance up slightly, I think. Something like that. Looks quite nice, I think. What else is going on in this preset? Colour grading, I've just made the shadows a bit warmer from memory. Yes. And yes. And then sharpening, I get quite aggressive with my sharpening for the simple reason that when I'm printing, I typically like to do so on heavy, matte textured paper. And because of that, I find I need to sharpen quite a lot to maintain a lot of the detail. Now when I'm sharpening, as I said, I'm pretty aggressive. I don't mind going up to 100 with the sharpening, but I make sure that if I'm going to do that, I'm equally as aggressive with my masking. So if I just hit Option and then move the masking slider, you can see that everything in white, the edges basically, is what's being sharpened. And I want to make sure that I've really only got the edges because I don't want anything else being sharpened, really. So something like that. So you end up with nice sharp edges without all the grain and noise that you get from sharpening the entire image. Okay, I quite like that. There are a few things that I'd probably twiddle around with though, and I will exaggerate these things just to show you what I'm doing for the sake of the tutorial. I probably wouldn't take things this far in my finished image. But this water down here I'm finding a little bit distracting. The wind kicked up when we were around here, and there's not as much of a reflection as I would have liked there to be, or as there was 15 minutes prior to this, which is a shame. But anyway, I'm going to try and solve some of the distraction in this water by going to my masks, grabbing a brush, making sure that I've got a reasonably big brush, and just painting over the water. I don't need to be particularly careful. I just want to make sure that I don't include too much of those rocks and that I'm only really selecting the water. So something like that looks okay. What I'm then going to do is go to clarity and just take the clarity way down. So I'm just taking some of the detail out of that water. And I might then boost the exposure of that water a bit as well, just to kind of mirror the background a touch. Something like that. Now that doesn't look massively natural to me, so what I might do is I might go to that mask and intersect it with a linear gradient and just blend it in to the scene rather than have it be applied equally across the entire brushed selection. So something like that. Okay, I quite like that. Another thing I would probably think about on some other images is I really like to go crazy with the luminance of the blue and just take a lot of the blue out of the sky if I don't find that it's adding to the image. There's not that much blue up here, but in other images I'd consider doing something like that just to make the sky really, really nice and soft. You can see if I do it on this photo though, because there's blue on this roof and in the flag, it affects those things as well. Now I could of course be much more selective with this, but actually I think for this image it's unnecessary. I actually don't mind the blue, and I like that the blue on the roof and in the flag is somewhat reflected in the sky. I think that looks quite nice. But one extra thing I would like to explore is another mask whereby I select the subject, and hopefully, yep, that's a pretty good selection, although I need to add the flag in. Okay, that's pretty good. Then if I invert the mask, yes, then I'm just going to bring down the clarity of the background as well, just to make sure that the subject, the hut, basically, or the huts, just to make sure that they stand out. So yeah, something like that. So this is the before, and this is the after. Just brighter, basically, but I've maintained the contrast, particularly in the subject. So that's what your eye gets drawn to most. Anyway, hopefully that was useful or interesting, and I'll see you next week when I'll be showing a video from Patagonia. Also, huge thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, Squarespace. And as I often do on trips like this, I've put together a page with some of my favourite photos from this Antarctica trip, and you can check that out again, link in the description. And it's super simple to do things like that on Squarespace. It's all drag and drop, and I've said a million times before that I think all photographers should have a website somewhere online to post and control their own photography, and Squarespace I think is just the best platform for photographers, because you don't need to know any code. As I say, it's all drag and drop. It's very, very straightforward to get exactly the look you want, because they've got templates for every conceivable kind of website that you can imagine, and it's just super simple to use. So if you would like a website where you can display your portfolio, and maybe you'd like a blog to accompany that, or an online store, definitely check out Squarespace. You can start a free trial by going to squarespace.com, and after that, if you'd like to make a purchase, just go to squarespace.com/James and you'll get 10% off your first purchase. So a big thank you to them for their continued support of this channel, and thank you to you for watching. And if you see me in a coffee shop over the next couple of days, please buy me a coffee and I'll owe you one, because I don't have any access to money. Never mind.